So, having said all of that, what do you do? So here are some suggestions. There's 5 steps that you can take to increase the probability that you will reach a satisfactory agreement in a negotiation. Okay, step number 1. You need to reflect on your own negotiation style. As you know, we take our cultural ways of doing things for granted. We don't pay too much attention. But when you are engaging in a cross-cultural negotiation, it is important for you to reflect. What is it that you're used to? What model do you use in negotiations? What are the popular models in your culture for negotiation? What's the role of the individual negotiator, yourself? What is involved in the interaction? Is it just all official, formal? Is it a lot of social stuff, informal stuff? And what does a satisfactory agreement mean in your culture? A documented, well put together agreement that's blessed by the lawyers? Is that your definition of a satisfactory agreement? Or what? So think about these. Put it on paper. This is a way of reflecting on your way of doing things and your culture's way of doing things. Now, step number 2, you do the same about the other side. You try to learn the same things about the other side. Now, here are a few things you need to be careful with. Don't be too quick to assume that you know their culture. It's so easy to generalize, stereotype. Be careful with that. Don't look for simple answers. Cultures are not simple things, they're complicated. And also, don't assume that all aspects of their culture are equally important. Here's an example. In this course, you've learned there are a variety of dimensions of national culture. Power distance, family orientation, performance orientation, future orientation. But it doesn't mean that all of them have exactly the same impact on how they negotiate. Some, for example, power distance, may have much bigger influence in the way they negotiate than others. Here's another thing that's really tricky. You may learn about the way they negotiate in their culture. So when 2 Saudi groups or Indian companies negotiate, this is how they do it. It does not always mean that the same Indian company negotiating with an American company is going to do it the same way. They may adjust their style of negotiation because now they're dealing with Americans and they know something about Americans. So bottom line is, it's important to learn about how people come to trust each other in their culture, how they negotiate with each other in their culture. But the next step is, how do they negotiate with foreigners? What's their experience? If an Indian company has years of experience negotiating with Germans, you can bet that they have learned a few things about how to negotiate with Germans. So they may not act like an Indian company when they're negotiating with Germans. Finally, keep in mind that people are not cultural robots. You know what this means, having gone through this course. Just because we know something about the German culture, it doesn't mean that every German is going to behave that way. We want to know about the German culture because it increases the probability that we understand how a German manager behaves. It's not 100%. So again, don't look for simple answers. It's more complicated than that. Let's go to step 3. Let's say that you have now developed some good understanding of yourself, your way of doing things, and their way of doing things. Now in step 3, you need to know something about their prior experience. As I just mentioned earlier, does this Indian company have any experience negotiating with Germans, with companies from our country? Do we see similarities and major differences between our way of doing things and their way of doing things? What is the balance of power between the Indian company and us, the German company? You know what I mean by that. I gave you the example of the author versus Amazon. Well, if I'm the German company and I'm going to buy the supply from you, the Indian company, and I don't have many other alternatives, or my other alternatives are either taking more time to deliver or are more expensive, then you, the Indian company, have more power. So what is the balance of power? Are there gender issues in negotiation? Some cultures tend not to have a lot of female managers. Finally, what's going on with the time schedule? What is our timeline? What would be a satisfactory timeline for us versus them? To me, an American company or a Canadian company, ideally we should be able to do this in 2 weeks. To my Thai counterpart, they would be much more comfortable with a 3-month process. That's why it's important to have this information. So one of the things you need to do, even before you start negotiation with your counterpart, is to ask them some questions about the process. What's a satisfactory process to them? To make sure you're not disappointed or surprised. Step number 4, having all of that information should help you develop some scenarios in terms of, okay, what approach is this counterpart going to take? In terms of what we discussed in session 7. What are those various steps of negotiation that this counterpart from India or from Germany or from Japan or Brazil are going to take? Doesn't mean you're going to know everything. That's not the point at all. The point is to give you some information and to engage you in some reflection and some thinking about the potential approaches that the other side is going to take. If you have a sense of what potential approaches they're going to take, then you can come up with ideas of how to connect to it, how to influence it. So that's step number 4. And finally, step number 5, you choose your strategy. How am I going to engage in this negotiation? What am I going to do? Now, in choosing your strategy, here are some pointers to think about. Has to be feasible, obviously. It has to be coherent, so a series of steps that you're going to take as pieces of a puzzle. For example, the concessions you're going to make. Obviously, it has to be appropriate in the setting. So if you have some ideas that are totally unacceptable in that environment, you're wasting your time. So not only appropriate, but also acceptable in that setting. And finally, you need to be comfortable with it. You're the one who's going to do it. So if you come up with a strategy that you're not sure of, you're uncomfortable with, it's not going to succeed. So these 5 bullets are good things for you to keep in mind. Now, What are some alternatives that companies have used in cross-cultural negotiation? Sometimes they hire an agent or an advisor, a consultant, who either happens to be from that part of the world or who is very knowledgeable about how things are done in that part of the world. That's fine. Sometimes they engage a mediator, someone who is a go-between and tries to bridge the two sides, who is familiar with both sides, who understands both sides, and try to bring them together. Another strategy that obviously you want to use is, what can I do to get the other side to come towards me? To come to decisions that are in favor of or consistent with my target. Of course, another alternative strategy is for you to adapt to the other side. Finally, another strategy for you is to constantly trying to figure out how the two parties both can adjust. It's not you adjusting to them, it's not them adjusting to you, it's both of you adjusting to each other. And as you know from previous week, obviously that's ideal. Doesn't always happen. But if you can coordinate that and get the two sides to come closer, you are more successful in building relationships. Okay, so these are kinds of strategic ideas that you can pursue. Now we're going to talk about what do you need to implement your strategy. At the end of the day, you got to sit down in front of the other person. You're going to start your negotiation. So what do you do? First of all, it's very important for you to monitor the other side's actions and reactions. Remember, you've done your homework, you have a lot of information in the background, you have a good sense of the potential scenarios, strategies that the other side is going to follow. So now your job is, every conversation is an opportunity for you to learn something about the other side. You have to be prepared to modify and shift and change. You can have the greatest strategy going into the negotiation, but remember, a negotiation is a give and take. So you have to be able and willing to modify as part of the conversations that are ongoing. Building relationships always is helpful and critical, and it doesn't always happen. But especially if it's between businesses, organizations, the deal is usually the opening to a long-term relation. And both sides have to understand that and have to keep that in mind. Negotiations can take too long, can be frustrating, can be unpredictable, things that can happen that you were not prepared for. Don't give up. It's part of the game. No matter how prepared you are, you have to accept the fact that there are things happening that you didn't think about. And there's going to be frustrations, and there's going to be debates and disagreements and all of that. You got to have your motivation. And again, remember what I said, people are not cultural robots. So yes, you try to predict the other side's behavior. You try to get a sense of the way they think, what their needs are, what their BATNAs are, all of that. But don't be surprised if they don't behave that way. You do all of that homework to be prepared, but it doesn't mean they're going to behave that way. So don't be surprised. Especially if you're dealing with sophisticated negotiators on the other side, that element of unpredictability can play a big role for them. Bottom line, you got to stay flexible. Stay motivated, stay flexible. despite all that homework, you got to accept the fact that things can go in different directions. And you need flexibility. All right, let me talk a little bit about the role of trust. You've done your homework on trust. You know what the issue is. Here's what we know about trust in negotiation. Trust is critical in any form of negotiation. When two parties do not trust each other, it is very difficult to reach any kind of agreement. You also know that people in different parts of the world use different criteria for trust. You know that fully. And we also know that it is typically harder to build trust across culture. It's usually easier for people to trust people in their own culture than people who they don't know anything about. So these are some facts that we know based on research.